program is part of the Scene Project's podcast network. The Scene Project features interviews with independent musicians, comedians, and artists from across the Midwest. Become part of our community and support local art wherever you are. Welcome into another exciting episode of The Scene. I'm your host, Bubba Startz, and with me today from the Up Schitt's Creek podcast, Cameron McKay. Cam, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's the Schitt Creek Survivor podcast. Love it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't even get it out because I've lived most of my life along that creek.
Yep.
Well, off the top, man, I know you have an interesting backstory, so I'd like to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll get into everything you're doing with the podcast now.
Sounds good. Your listeners might recall about 10 years ago, 2 officers being shot in Ferguson, Missouri. I was one of those officers. I actually got shot in the face. I took a .40 Full Metal jacket to my right cheek, went through my head, hit me on the back of the inside of the skull, and it dropped down into my neck where it came to rest in my carotid artery and jugular. What's crazy about that is I was home 8 hours later with a bullet in my neck. I was at Barnes. I think you're in Missouri, maybe in Missouri. Anyways, I was at Barnes in St. Louis, Missouri, and they asked if I wanted to go home. I said, sure. I was home 8 hours later, but I didn't understand that following that physical injury, there would be a lot of mental recovery. I ended up being severely affected by PTSD. And what I did to kind of pause that pain is I self-medicated with alcohol, which made things worse. After about 8 months, I was no longer with the department because I was unable to return. That was kind of like a bummer. But anyways, I was in a really, really bad place. I felt isolated. I felt alone. I wasn't spiritually connected in any way. I was hollow, and I just wanted it to be over. And on the year anniversary of the shooting, my wife actually found me in bed having a seizure, which I had never had before. She said, you're going to the hospital. I said, the heck I am. I was ready to go. And eventually a police officer ended up asking me a question. Does your wife deserve to be this scared? And I said, no. He goes, will you please go out to the ambulance and just get your blood pressure taken? So I'm having seizures on the way out to the ambulance. My blood pressure ends up being like 230 over 130. They think I'm about to have a stroke. And, they get me to the hospital. I was not a pleasant, patient, if you will, and they were going to sedate me, but the doctor was like, you got to get a CAT scan of his head, figure out what's going on. And they saw that I actually had Press syndrome, and the Press syndrome is when the cranium inside your brain is so high it starts squeezing your brain, causing the seizures. And so they kind of put me made me comfortable, and they were working on that. But then I went into alcohol withdrawal. That lasted, I'm not sure how long, but I'm grateful I was in a hospital as it was happening. I don't remember it, so that's a good thing. But when that happened, I must have aspirated or something like that. And I ended up having pneumonia in one lung, which turned into double pneumonia. I had a right lung collapse, and I ended up being in a coma for about 5 weeks. And I was strapped down to the bed, all that kind of crazy stuff. But somewhere in there, I actually had a near-death experience. And I know that's true because all the pain mentally, physically, and spiritually, it suddenly went away. And I was standing in a light and feeling an immense love that I'd never felt before. So bright in front of me, I couldn't even look into it. I could only see bricks of a golden road in front of me. And I realized I was holding someone's hand. I look over, it was my grandma, who had passed away, who's very dear to me and loved me very much. And I looked at her. I looked ahead of me again. I looked to the left. It was gray. I looked behind me. It was pitch black, but there was people floating in the darkness, and they looked like they were in pain. And I looked back at my grandma without moving my lips. I said, how is it they're so close to where pain doesn't exist? And we're right here. And that's right when I woke up to my wife slapping me in the face, pulling me out of a coma. Because if you go past 5 weeks, you don't have a lot. Your chances of returning go dramatically down because your brain starts to figure out, oh, I don't have to breathe. I've got oxygen being forced to me. So She pulled me out of that against doctor's wishes because I didn't think I'd make it, but thank goodness I'm not plugged into a wall right now. And she taught me how to walk, and one thing that happened, and it's a bummer, and I woke up and I was actually upset that I woke up because all the pain came back and the situation came back and the struggles came back and all that kind of good stuff. But, about 3 months later, again, I don't remember the withdrawal, but 3 months later, I decided I was going to drink because I was a grown man, and that got out of control pretty quick. I ended up having to go to my first AA meeting by the grace of God. And I was exposed to a environment and a program where people would speak about, I would have considered at that time, embarrassing situations, shameful situations. Why would you share those stories with people? But over time, I started realizing, wow, there's power to this because I can see myself in some of these stories, and I see that everyone else is doing that in this program. So me and my former patrol partner, we decided, after a long period of recovery, it had been about 8 years, I came to him with the idea of let's do a podcast, which will kind of be like an AA meeting, or even like we're in the car. We're just talking because we would have 12-hour shifts, and eventually you start talking about real stuff, and it helps. And so we decided, how about we just speak our truths, the good, the bad, the ugly, the funny, the stupid, all that kind of stuff, just like in an AA meeting, and just speak that truth out there so someone else who's struggling can use that information or whatever it may be, so that they can move forward and possibly help someone else move forward. So we like the idea of Shit Creek survivors because I believe that we've all found ourselves up shit creek without a paddle. And what we'd like to focus on is, yes, the real stories of being stuck up shit creek and how sad that gets and hitting rock bottom and whatever it may be. But more importantly, we talk about the paddles or the tools that helped you or that individual get out of their own shit creek. That way, other people can pick up those paddles and move forward. And by doing that, we're providing hope for individuals who may not be ready to go into or may not be ready to speak to somebody, whether it be family, an individual, a friend, a counselor, a pastor, whatever it may be, and they're trying to sort it out on their own. And it's a really dangerous situation where you've got some trauma going on in your head and you're trying to handle it alone. We do need help. We are communal creatures. I know this. I self-isolated. I was hiding in a basement, a gun in one hand, a bottle in the other. I was trying to figure out on my own, and it did not work. And I encourage anyone out there, if you're struggling with anything, take a chance on trying to pick up a tool or a paddle that you don't know about. Even if it's to pick it up and just discredit it. Be like, yeah, no, see, I told you this doesn't work. At least you're searching, at least you're seeking. And when you finally get those aha moments, you'll feel that power, and eventually you will be able to turn around and help somebody as well.
Love everything I heard there, Cam. I say it on the podcast all the time that this is how God is healing our world. It's how we're healing one another. It's how we're healing ourselves, is by coming on these podcasts and just having these conversations. I never think of this as a show, right? It's just a conversation between two friends. I tell a lot of guests who are maybe a little bit nervous about it, that nobody's listening, right? It's just me and you here. We're having a conversation. We're getting to know each other, and sharing my shit is how I began to really start to heal and letting go of a lot of anger that wasn't serving me, and can speak to the self-medication and poor decisions. I'm sorry you went through a lot of the things that you had to go through, but I'm glad that you came out the other side of it, not just alive, but inspired to help others. I think that's so important for many of us to realize that once you have the paddle, it is not merely for yourself. It's to do exactly what you're doing with your podcast. And that is to show that paddle to as many people as you can and introduce them to maybe another way of coping and dealing with it. And I commend you for everything that you've been through and everything that you're doing now to help others avoid some of the same fates that you put yourself into.
Yeah. And I noticed the sign you have behind you about veteran suicide, right? So I think the last time I looked at the numbers, we're losing 22 veterans a day and we're losing 8 first responders. So that means every day we're losing 30 individuals to suicide. And these are individuals who stepped to the line when they were called upon. These are not people who usually take the easy way out. These are not people who give up. These are people who put themselves into situations and been harmed through it. And we, as former police officers, veterans, Dennis, my co-host, is a veteran, we aren't encouraged to talk about this stuff. We're basically encouraged to pack it up in a bag or ball it up into a ball and stick it way down, right? What I found out is that trauma, whenever you had it in life, it actually couples with that trauma. It kind of tangles like a ball of yarn. So I was showing up to my therapy sessions, working on getting over being shot, and it just wasn't moving. I couldn't get over it. And I was at the end of my rope, and I was sober at this point. And I came into her one day, because again, I was really at the end of my rope. And I said, hey, something happened to me when I was 5 years old, which involved an adult. When that adult taught us this adult game, afterwards we were told that it was shameful, our parents wouldn't love us, and all this kinds of stuff. And as a 5-year-old, I saved that memory. I kept it to myself. I kind of believed it. And I figured, in a way, I'm going to be good for the rest of my life and I'm going to outwork this trauma. But it wasn't a conscious thing. It was almost like a subconscious thing. So suddenly, after I got shot, I'm not just dealing with the trauma of being shot. I'm also having these other traumas start to pop up. You know what I mean? These things that I hadn't fully processed. So there's the thing when I was a little kid, but there's also things like calls you go on. Like when you show up on a call and a guy has committed suicide by putting his head on the railroad tracks in the snow. And you show up and you have to handle that. There's brains everywhere. You're doing your thing. And in order to get through that, you have to, in a way, sort of protect yourself. You almost keep a barrier between you and what's going on as best you can. But when that guy's wife walks down the tracks and is walking towards the scene, and she's pregnant and holding like a 2-year-old's hand, and she's asking, what do I do now? You are more than a police officer. You are more than a first responder. You are more than an active duty member of the service, because now you're actually guiding this person. You are taking accountability and helping them move forward with their life, however that may be. And when you do that, whether you've noticed it, because we usually only do that for family and like close friends, when you do that, it does slice off a little bit of you. And you do go home thinking about that, because we're encouraged after that call to code it. It's over. Move on to the next, right? Without processing or really handling what's going on. So there's a lot of this going on, and these guys and girls aren't being encouraged out there on the front line in first responder world, especially police world, to talk about these things. Like it's almost pushed against, in a way that, like, if I come to you and you're my commanding officer and I say, I'm struggling with a call, okay? That can create a situation for the department. So the department's like, oh, we now have a piece, the way they see it is, we now have a piece of equipment that may not be operating properly. So what do? It's not that they seek help for that person. What they do is they send them to a counselor who's a mandated reporter. A mandated reporter reports back to your department if you are able to work or not. So are you willing to give up your job for the thing you want to talk about? Most likely not. You got a family on your back. You got to do what you got to do. You got to work, all this kinds of stuff. So you try to handle it on your own. We're notorious in this world to handle it with alcohol, to handle it with other kinds of drugs, and it's just not the right path. And there's another way, and we can do it. It's just going to take a lot of work and a lot of advocating and a lot of what you're doing here, representing it instead of it being in the main news, because they're not encouraged to cover any of this kinds of stuff, like really talking to people and letting them know that it's happening in their own neighborhood. There's people struggling all around us. And somewhere, I think we are fed the lie that life's supposed to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, something's wrong. And I got caught in that for a long time, because I was trying to, after the injury, return to who I was. that was like paddling upstream. It's just not going to happen. I've changed. I have to accept the change. And that change can be for the good. And so if you take something that has almost destroyed you and you say, you know what, I'm going to turn this into something positive, not only for me, but for other people who come behind me. It's like scattering seeds, you know, and just hoping just like trees grow in places that you even never even knew they would, whose shade you'll never, ever get to enjoy. But I learned when I crossed over, now that there is something on the other side, I'm going to cross over the next time with my heart full. I am going to lean into it. I am going to choose the path, the right path, which is the hard path, which is not the path that most people are on right now. So anyways, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, we need to build that soapbox as high as we can. What an impossible situation that we put these first responders and our military in. There's things that you've seen that you'll never unsee and that you carry with you and that have changed you. And to ask you to compartmentalize that, one, to do it in the moment, to finish the job is one thing, but to ask you to completely forget that for a lifetime or for the length of your career and to not expect it to come back up in the worst of times for threat of losing your livelihood is absolutely disgusting to me. And it speaks to problems that are endemic in the systems that are in place. And I hope that through work that you're doing, not just on the podcast, but I would assume inside your community of first responders as well, that we find ways in this generation to fix it. Because it's not fair to these human beings that are putting their lives on the line to then have their livelihoods put on the line when they have dealt with a situation that is going to change you. And the example that you gave is obviously the most extreme of those, but you touched on not just you, right? Not just you having to deal that, but now this young mother and this young family that you now, how would you not feel responsible for that and having to, you know, do things that you're not necessarily prepared for? And there's no amount of training that you would ever receive that's going to prepare you for those moments. And to ask someone to forget about it and move on is childish.
Yeah.
If
you ever notice, if you look at a police department, and I didn't realize this until I was already in law enforcement, but if you look around at a police department, the majority of the officers are relatively young. So is that maybe an indication that at some point a lot of people part ways with law enforcement before they get old because they see that it's not actually a long-term thing? You just don't see that many old cops unless you're like in a small town or something like that. You don't see old cops running and gunning downtown and, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's an interesting thing to ponder. If you look at a police department, you're like, huh, they are all young. So what happens to all of them, you know? And that's, still trying to figure that out.
In one way or another. I know some departments have policies, which I hope that they have very good retirement policies and plans for these people in line. I know that certain departments and highway patrol and offices of those nature that they won't accept people that are over the age of 35 or 40, that right. they keep it young, because if you're going to work in this field for any amount of time, you know, if you have a 10-15 year career as a law enforcement officer, no matter the size of your town, I live in a very small town, but you know, you're going to see some shit. Like you're going to see things that you're never going to be able to forget. And if you don't have tools or paddles in which to deal with them or people to talk to without the threat of losing your job, because I feel that it's more detrimental to yourself and to society to ask you to bury that where it can come up in the worst of moments than having the tools and the people that can help you to cope with that and to move forward, you know, and not to bottle it up and just move forward, right? To be able to deal with it and to work through it, to move forward in a healthy manner. than to have it come up later in life, right? Somebody living with PTSD that is charged with, keeping their community safe, but is struggling with something that they're not talking about. And I don't really have examples to pull from, but that PTSD may lead them to make a rash decision or to not make a decision because of paralysis in the future sometime that puts other people's lives at risk, not the least their own. So, like I said, it's something that needs to be changed within the system itself and not necessarily at just the individual level. We have individuals out here that need help, but we need to help them by building better systems.
Yeah. And there have been some states who have made some pretty good progress. I think Florida's done pretty well. Georgia, where I reside, they do a pretty good job of taking care of their people, but different states just do different things. In Missouri, I didn't know this until I was in law enforcement, but you are not allowed to join a union. So there is no union kind of protection or anything like that. They have a fraternity kind of deal of police where if you needed some legal counsel or something like that, you can call them, but it isn't like a union. You know what I mean? It's not like a protective force that's monitoring that you're being taken care of the proper way. It's basically you against kind of like the department fighting for your rights and medical treatment and all this kinds of stuff. Like after I got shot, they said, okay, we'll give you 8 therapy sessions. I think in that first year, because I fought for it, I was going to 2 a week. So I did at least 100 sessions in that first year, and it almost wasn't enough to get me through. So 8 sessions being like, yeah, we'll give you 8 sessions isn't enough, especially with a man.
Slap in the face. It's an absolute slap in the face when you just took a bullet to the face on top of it. It's disturbing that these departments behave in this manner, but it's not necessarily individuals. Like I said, it comes down to systems and building better systems. And how do you do that if you don't share the stories of the human individuals that have lived these experiences? And that's why I really commend you for starting the podcast and continuing to get on and to talk about these things weekly and sharing them with the public, because there's so many of us in the private sector that would never know what you've gone through. Now, I come from the other side of the fence. I was, for all intents and purposes, a drug dealer, right? I did 2 years in prison for selling marijuana. So I have seen and, experience and put myself in positions that probably gave me a fair amount of PTSD, right? From the other side of the fence. Now, I've never been shot at. I've been very fortunate that in those days, I never had a gun pulled on me, but I was probably very close more times than I knew, and dealing with things that I don't and that I don't wish upon anyone else in my time. Hell, Cam, I ran away to Mexico for a year and lived in Mexico on the run from those felonies as an illegal immigrant south of the border, right?
That's awesome.
I didn't necessarily deal with that perfectly well, but even just putting my wife at the time, now ex-wife, and a child born down there in those situations as well, where we were never safe. And I think that because of the situation and some of the people we had around us, I maybe felt safer than we actually were. But I operated with blinders on, and because of things that I was burying, right, and putting people in situations that didn't deserve to be there. So I'm very happy that your wife slapped the shit out of you and woke you up and brought you back. And man, if that's not love, I don't know what is. I hope you two are still happily married after all that you've been through. And what a woman. I'd love to interview her sometime, because her side of this story is just as important.
What's funny is when I tell her that, I've been like, maybe you should come on the podcast and talk about what it's like for a spouse, what it's like, for someone on the outside watching someone who may not want to help themselves, and how painful that can be. And she just looks at me and she's like, why? It's what I'm supposed to do. It's like awe-inspiring. I'm like, huh? Because there's been so many times I've almost questioned her, like, why haven't you left? And she just wouldn't give up on me. It was unbelievable. Now, we're not perfect by any means, but we just stuck together. And we ended up in Georgia because her office actually got shut up in St. Louis. And she said, I can't lose my job. What do you got for me? And they said, well, we got a promotion for you in Atlanta, but you got to be there in 30 days. We figured God was doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. We sold our house. We looked at one another and said, we can either go with this or we can fight it. If we fight it, we may not survive. So we just, without even seeing the apartment, we put the down payment on. I drove down to Atlanta in one day and back in that same day just to give them the deposit for the key without seeing the place. And it's been amazing. It's been absolutely amazing. When I first got down here, someone would hold the door for me and I would literally blade off and I'd be like, what do you want? Because I was so used to that like tense atmosphere in St. Louis and all that kind of stuff. And I realized they're just holding the door. Now I get to hold the door. And it's been such an amazing, like, I'm stubborn. I will say that. So my egg cracked really slow. You know what I mean? I was very like hard done to. I was a victim for a very long time. I was like stuck in this place where this isn't my fault. I thought I did the ultimate thing. I thought this was like almost proved my allegiance to, like a department, but now they fired me because I can't return and all this kind of stuff. So, I felt very down and out for a long period of time. But I look back at it now, and this is going to sound crazy. If not for being shot, I wouldn't be who I am today. And I would pick who I am today over who I was the night I got shot. And that's taken a long time. It's been 10 years. I got shot in 2015. And it's just been a really long process, especially with that extra trauma. Technically, I have complex PTSD. And it's just it's funny. I didn't realize that childhood memory or that trauma meant something because I'm tough and I had to tuck it away and, I can handle it and all that kind of stuff. But it mattered. And we as men do not talk about this. So when I talk about it every once in a while, especially if I'm giving like a public speech or if I'm in an academy talking to people, I'll have someone come up to me, a man, and be like, that happened to me. I appreciate you saying that. And that's all it is. It's just like recognition that they're not alone. They're like, oh, that happened to me. I said it to one of my former officers, and about 2 hours later, we were playing golf. He was like, so tell me more about that. And then he kind of explained a situation of his own, and like all this kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on with a lot of people. And police officers do not have it all together. We're just normal human beings, just trying to make the right decisions most of the time. Same as everyone in life, just trying to do our best most of the time, I guess. But anyways, we find that there's strength in sharing stories of being stuck up your own shit creek because it's good for the person who's telling it. I've found, and it's really weird, if you run into someone who's been through trauma, they want to tell you all about it. They'll tell you the story. And then if they see you again, they'll tell you the story. I would tell my story to strangers. I would tell my story till I was blue in the face, till I saw people rolling their eyes almost. And I didn't understand it. It was almost like impulsive. And within the last couple of years, someone brought me the idea that is a natural response to trauma because trauma is almost like a jagged rock that you have in your hand and it hurts you every time you touch it, you move it, you try to whatever. But the more you tell the story, it kind of smooths that rock out. It kind of makes it a little bit easier to tell the next time and a little bit easier to emphasize on the things that are important to others instead of just yourself. And it just gets smoother and smoother and smoother. So when you tell your story, you're giving yourself a gift. Like you really are. You're giving yourself freedom. You're giving yourself power over a situation that may have had total control over you. And in doing that and speaking authentically to that, someone else out there hears it and they can have any kind of like basically like symbionts or recall to a memory that they have or something like that. Like you're helping them. And by helping them, they can help people around them. So it's kind of this cascading ripple effect, whatever you want to say. But the more we talk about this stuff, the stronger we're going to be. I mean, nothing's more courageous than talking about the stuff that's happened to you and own it.
Powerful testimony, Cam. I appreciate you coming on the show today. Tell everyone where they can find your podcast and where they can hear more from you guys.
Yeah, it's Shit Creek Survivors. The I is an exclamation point. You can find us on all major platforms. You can also go to our website, www.shitcreeksurvivors.com. And you can check us out there. You can contact us there if you want to be on the show or be evaluated to see if you should come on the show. Send us some contact information. On Facebook, it's SHT Creek Survivors. They wouldn't let me put the I or the exclamation point. So,
oh, well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today. I would love to come on and share my experience in the world on your guys' podcast sometime. I would feel honored to do so. Cam, thanks for being part of the scene.
Thank you so much.